Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of a king who built a massive empire, became a patron of a world religion, and committed the ultimate sin. We're talking about Ajatashatru of Magadha, a ruler whose legacy is written in both conquest and blood.
Now, this isn't just some hypothetical question. For King Ajatashatru, this was the shocking, central act that defined his entire life and set the stage for a reign built on brutal ambition.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story begins in the powerful kingdom of Magadha. It was ruled by the Haryanka dynasty, a real powerhouse of the era. The king, Bimbisara, had a son, an heir, named Ajatashatru, which, in a bit of deep irony, actually means one without enemies.
But see, Ajatashatru wasn't the type to just wait his turn. He was ambitious, and he was getting impatient. And you had these influential figures whispering in his ear, like Devadatta, the Buddha's own cousin, who had his own agenda, basically telling him to seize what was his. So that's exactly what he did. He staged a coup against his own father.
He actually threw his father in prison. Just wow. But the story of what happened next, how the king actually died, well, that's where things get really interesting because it totally depends on which ancient text you pick up.
And this is where the historical record splits right down the middle, probably because each religious tradition wanted to tell the story in a way that served its own teachings. On one hand, you have the Buddhist sources. They paint a very clear picture. They call him pitrihanta, the father killer, and say he straight up tortured and starved his father to death. But then you look at the Jain sources, and they tell a much more complicated story, almost a tragic misunderstanding. In their version, Ajatashatru has a change of heart. He grabs an axe to go break his father's chains, but the terrified old king sees his son rushing at him with an axe and, thinking he's about to be executed, takes his own poison. In both stories, Ajatashatru is responsible, but the nature of his crime is still up for debate.
So now he's got the throne, which he took through this ultimate act of betrayal. And you know what? He ruled with that exact same ruthless efficiency. He immediately launched this relentless campaign of conquest and expansion because he was determined to make Magadha the supreme power in the land.
His reign was basically defined by constant war. This was an era where all these kingdoms, Magadha, Kosala, the Vajji Confederacy, were all fighting for control of the super valuable Gangetic plains. Ajatashatru fought his own uncle for control of Kosala and then threw his kingdom into this grueling 16-year-long war against the Vajjis. It was all about establishing Magadha's dominance, period.
But here's the thing, brute force wasn't always his go-to move. When he couldn't break the united Vajji clans, he got clever. He used cunning. He sent his top minister, a guy named Vasikara, to go live among them, and for 3 years, his job was to systematically destroy their unity from the inside out, spreading rumors and turning them against each other.
And once the enemy alliance was basically a mess, squabbling amongst themselves, that's when he struck. And his victory was pretty much guaranteed, thanks to some military innovations that were, frankly, way ahead of their time.
Okay, first up, the Mahashilakantaka. Just picture it, a giant catapult, an engine of war that could hurl massive boulders into enemy ranks. It would have created absolute chaos, smashing through walls and formations like they were nothing.
And then there was this thing, the Ratha Masala. This is just brilliant in a terrifying way. It's a heavily armored chariot, but with huge, scythe-like blades attached to its wheels. A literal death machine designed to just mow a path right through enemy soldiers.
You know, all this strategic thinking wasn't just about new weapons. During this long war, he also fortified a small village right on the strategically important Ganges River. That little military outpost, Pataligrama, would eventually grow into the legendary capital city of Pataliputra.
So he built this incredible empire, but it was on a foundation of violence and betrayal. And as his reign went on, the king who lived by the sword started to seek out men of peace.
And this really gets to the heart of his story, the great contradiction of his life. Haunted by what he'd done, Ajatashatru, who was actually a contemporary of both Mahavira and the Buddha, started to turn towards spirituality.
According to the Buddhist sources, the king was an absolute wreck. He was tormented by his crime, couldn't sleep. And the turning point, they say, was the birth of his own son. The story goes that when he held his child, he felt this overwhelming, protective love, and in that moment, he finally understood the love his own father must have had for him. Just crushed by guilt, he sought out the Buddha, confessed everything, and dedicated himself to finding peace.
This timeline really puts his life in perspective. He grabs the throne around 492 BCE, and as we've seen, he spends the next decade and a half at war.
But then, around 483 BCE, a pivotal event. The Buddha passes away. This moment, coming after all that brutal conflict, seems to have been a major catalyst for Ajatashatru, leading directly to his most famous act of peaceful patronage just months later, and kind of foreshadowing his own violent end around 460 BCE.
And this might be the most incredible twist in the whole story. The Patricide king became the patron of preservation. He sponsored the very first Buddhist council at Rajgriha. He brought together 500 of the most senior monks to collect, organize, and preserve the Buddhist teachings, making sure they would survive for future generations.
But history, and maybe karma, has a funny way of coming full circle. Ajatashatru's story doesn't just end with peaceful patronage.
The cycle of violence that he started, he couldn't escape it. In a final, tragic twist, his own son, Udayabhadra, did the exact same thing to him. He murdered his father to seize power, a perfect, brutal, karmic echo of his own original crime.
So even with that violent end, you just can't deny his legacy. It's massive. He expanded an empire, built a legendary city, and in the great paradox of his life, helped ensure the survival of a philosophy of peace. He is an absolutely fascinating and deeply complex historical figure.
So, that was a lot. How do we wrap our heads around a guy like this? Let's try and distill his entire complicated story down to 5 key takeaways. Okay, first, his ruthless ambition, which drove him to kill his own father for the throne. Second, he was a master empire builder who used both innovation and strategy to make Magadha a superpower. Third, the man was a walking contradiction, a brutal warrior who also sought spiritual solace. Fourth, his crucial role as the patron of preservation, sponsoring the council that saved the Buddhist teachings. And finally, that inescapable cycle of karma. His own life ended in the exact same violent way it truly began.
So at the end of the day, who was he? A brutal tyrant, a brilliant nation builder, a guilty man looking for redemption? The truth is, he was probably all of those things at once. And his story is just a powerful reminder that the figures who shape our world are never, ever simple.